Welcome to 1962, exactly 60 years ago, the end of October 1962.
The interval between this podcast and our next podcast will, 60 years ago, have been the exact same interval.
Get the idea? The Beatles will have experienced the exact same number of days, same season. All of you who have been following this real-time chronicle with us already get the pace.
You already understand, right? Same speed. Technically, we'd call this a longitudinal phenomenological historiographic study.
Larry, what's with all the academic jargon?
Well, this is a serious series. The Earth turns at one speed and in one way, am I right? At least in lived experience, last I looked. Now remember, the future is unwritten.
Ultimately, we're talking about human experience. We can't walk in the Beatles' boots if we're jumping around all different billions and billions of years, as nothing could make any sense.
So come on, we gotta repeat that slogan. This is a chronicle.
Beatles 60, we ain't jumping around. Okay, so, October, almost November 1962. Coming up in this episode, well, Andy, we are gonna jump ahead, right?
Yeah, bear with us, UK listeners. Our purpose here today is based on the idea that our non-UK listeners are not so aware, from what we've observed, of the circumstances surrounding the Beatles' rise in the UK before becoming a worldwide phenomenon. We'll be talking about promotion, publishing, radio and TV performances, and going as far ahead as January of 1963.
In fact, at the end of the episode, we'll follow up on the previous episode and help non-Brits build their minds a mental scaffolding, if you will, to remember how UK Beatlemania unfolded in the UK in the spring of 1963 in the UK. Although Andy and I are both Americans, I was only 60 years ago, and Andy wasn't even born.
Not quite yet a twinkle in my parents' eyes.
But, in fact, his date of birth will be revealed at the end of the episode because
Dun, dun, dun.
it's perfect timing. We're not lying. This is a real thing. The thing is, we've been studying 60 years ago every day for the past few years, and for the Beatles, it's all been Northwest England in our story for the past 2 years, 1960, 1961, 62. With some Hamburg trips thrown in, of course, famously. So we're less UK ignorant than your average Yanks.
Too right.
But do correct us, please, if we get any of this wrong.
Or if you don't like our ties.
Twister.
Hey there, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm Andrew Martin Adamson from the Barmy Beatle blog. Call me Andy. And he's... Who are you again?
It is I. I am Rents. But on this podcast, I use the nickname of my youth, Larry.
Like the Stooge.
A bit of a stooge, I suppose. As usual, we have three main segments. First, we'll talk about the change in publishers. It shows both Epstein and Martin as three-dimensional humans, saving face, and so on. The change of publishers may not be the most exciting puzzle piece, though.
Well, it's like one of those pieces that, yeah, it's not the most important. No real detail, just like a piece of sky or something. The puzzle isn't complete without it, but it's not the biggest part of the picture.
Like all one color, yeah.
Yeah,
one of
right.
those pieces.
Yeah.
But getting publisher Dick James on board will turn out to have been fortuitous come January, hint, hint, hint. And we'll get to that later in this episode. Actually, I know this only because you told me, so same as the listeners, I want to know. I want to know the details.
Oh, well, and after that, we'll talk about how the radio and TV appearances of the Beatles increased over the next few months, perhaps due to the rise of Love Me Do in the UK singles chart.
And because we weren't there at the time, and we aren't English, the TV and radio show names all become kind of a blur. So Andy will put them a bit more into focus. And then, wait for it, we're going to expand on the last episode's breakout of stages of UK Beatlemania, starting now, covering all of 1963, which is the next year, and ending with them preparing to land in New York, Nueva York, February 1964.
Yeah, that was the point at which UK Beatlemania would sow the seeds for worldwide Beatlemania. February 1964 onwards, still very far away for us right now.
It's very far away, but it's exciting to have a kind of a map, like how we're going to get there.
Yeah, this is how we're getting there.
Because like back at the Indra, it just felt like, okay, how do you get from here to Ed Sullivan?
Yeah.
But basically, it's a 4-stage timeline that takes us from now to preparing for America. Now being, again, the end of 62.
Yeah.
Up until the beginning of 64. So it's like a whole year plus the end of the previous year, the beginning of the next year.
Yeah.
If it were one stage, it'd be like this giant leap from the cavern to the Ed Sullivan Show.
With the really interesting story being everything that happened in between.
And I just think that, I know I tended to overlook it. I'm not the biggest Beatle expert. I'm only learning as we go. I only know 60 years ago. So if it was a mystery to me, kind of what happened pre-America, it probably was for other Americans too, especially first generation, we oldsters. So let's see. Let's skip the Where We Goin' Fellas theme music. Just, I don't know, quickly in one sentence, Andy, what was the Beatle mood like in October, November 1962?
For the most part, things were going pretty much to plan. They weren't so worried about the details. That was Brian's problem. So maybe it was the least frustrated they would ever be. Maybe.
Yeah, Brian really kept himself busy, eh?
Yeah.
Well, just before we get to publishing, TV and radio, and the stages of UK Beatlemania, let's do that little jump ahead in the timeline that we promised. The Beatles themselves, not NEMS, etc., just the Beatles, had only 2 staff members, as far as I know, that lasted the whole time from pre-Mania through post-Get Back.
That would be Neil Aspinall and Mal Evans. We're going to hear some of what Rob Geurtsen had to say about Mal, who would soon start working full-time for the Beatles.
So where we are currently, he's not working full-time for the Beatles, but he's
a few more months.
Yeah. But we're going to talk about a time when he's almost about to, but he's still not.
He's doing some work for them, but he becomes full-time a few months later, yeah.
Yeah. He's more cavern door guy at first, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're doing kind of a winter preview this episode. Rob Geurtsen is an historian with a master in cognitive science from Chapel Hill. We interviewed Rob in our latest B60 Live, and the audio archive is there for anyone who wants to hear the whole thing. Tell you later how to access it. It's a simple trick, but I'll tell you later. Here, he's talking about his friend Ken Womack's upcoming book on Mal, coming out in 2023. This is a big deal. There'll be a deluxe follow-up with actual copies of Mal's actual archive in 2024. Dr. Kenneth Womack, for those who don't know, is a professor of English at Monmouth University and a prolific author with many books on the Beatles.
Great books.
Great books. And so see the show notes for links to both of their pages.
Yeah, and this archive of Mal Evans includes diaries, drawings, recordings, even a manuscript. We like to think that the way this work of Womack is coming is kind of similar to how Peter Jackson was given access to everything that made up the Get Back documentary. Not too bold of a statement, is it?
Roadies are not dummies.
No.
He was really central, and apparently, we think he looks a bit oafy or something, but he must have been pretty literate,
Yeah.
I don't know why we have this. Just because he's not like one of the singers,
Right.
We think he's kind of, just because he's carrying the equipment around. Roadies are important. And, this is sort of like the way Woody Guthrie's daughter gave Billy Bragg and Wilco all his unpublished lyrics a couple of decades ago, to build songs with. Similar kind of generational handing over of important old things, as yet unheard or unseen, into capable hands. And Ken Womack certainly is capable of producing something really great from Mal's manuscript, The official biography and archives of Mal Evans is curated by Womack and Mal's son Gary as a kind of an institution. We'll link to the official page on Facebook. That, too, it will be in the show notes.
Yeah. So let's listen to Rob Geurtsen. I think people have kind of jumped on the Mal bandwagon now because of Get Back, and he's such a charismatic character in that documentary.
Right.
But I remember thinking about him all the way back to watching Help. Who is that guy, who comes up out of the water? And as I learned more about him even many years ago, how important he was to the story, and how much he did for them, how he helped them with everything from getting them tea to helping write lyrics. He's a story that needs to be told.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we have this. We all have this myth about the diaries and a book that Mel ever wrote. And what happened the last couple of years is that this stuff emerged from a mystery place. Went through Yoko Ono, by the way, and then it happened to be Kenneth Womack, who is now writing a biography on Mel Evans.
Excellent.
And it's going to appear next year. And then after that, something will happen which is even nicer. The book that Mel Evans wrote on his experience, on his life with the Beatles, for which he got permission of the Beatles to publish, will be published in 24. As part of a book with all his diaries and all his other notes, and the wonderful thing that we will see from these books is he was a beautiful guy, in awe of the Beatles, but he could also make drawings. His cartoons are beautiful. I've seen a few of them, and he has a lot of cartoons that Paul McCartney drew. So opening up his vaults and editing these vaults by Kenneth Womack is going to really reveal this big story. Because as we earlier said, nobody does it alone, and the Beatles didn't do it alone. They needed people who were so supportive and in awe of them and always willing to help.
Very cool. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of this new information about Mal. Dr. Womack didn't want Rob to read from Mal's diaries at this time, but he was allowed to paraphrase it in our Beatles 60 Live podcast. It really gives full details about the broken windshield, Beatles sandwich story, paraphrased by Rob.
So that was when it was fucking freezing, and the windshield broke, and they had to drive the length of England, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
It's sort of semi-embargoed for now, but you can hear it paraphrased.
Yeah.
That's as close as we'll get.
Paraphrased by Rob. And you can hear this.
Spoilers!
By going to the Beatles 60 Live archive. You can hear this and our conversations with so many more Beatles people, such as Jude Sutherland Kessler, Steve Bradley, Mark Ashworth, Jerry Murphy, and others. So, how can you find the Beatles 60 Live archive?
Oh, good question. Well, look, Denise is here again, as usual, to help you find your way to the Beatles 60 Live archive.
Hey, Denise.
Andy and Larry appreciate those who listen all through the regular podcast episodes. So we have a new, very cool bonus for you, an exclusive monthly event called Beatles 60 Live. The live show is audio, not video. First weekend of every month, membership is free and audio access is free. It's all free and easy. This audio doesn't appear in the normal podcast feed, but you can access it from anywhere in the world by signing up for Beatles 60 Live. Once you sign up, you'll see how easy access is. Okay. Here's how you find the members page. There's just one simple little trick. See this episode notes. Find the Beatles 60.group link. Open that in any browser. To get to the secret live page for members, just add live at the end. So it's Beatles60.group/live. Again, Beatles60.group/live. The first time you get there, you'll have to sign up. It takes just a couple of seconds. Just enter any name and valid email, and you're there. Bob's your uncle. It's that straightforward. Got it? That's Beatles60.group/live. We'll email you in advance of each live so you'll know the exact time to listen, specified in most world time zones. And you'll have a convenient invitation link sent to you privately. You'll find stuff easily using the members-only navigation. Dead simple once you're in. Full live event information is all there. If you have any trouble, just contact Andy. He can give you the link privately or resend the confirmation email or whatever. Members who miss the live event can listen later. We'll archive each one on the Beatles 60 Live page. You can just choose a past date, hit the play button, and listen anytime. Hope you can join.
I just want to add that your email address is safe with me. I'm the only one who will email you no more than once a month to announce each event, and it's easy to unsubscribe. You have my word.
Andy is trustworthy. Come and join our little insider community.
Yes. So let's get into this and talk about the publishing front, okay? Lines had been drawn, sides had been taken. You may remember that we have talked about Kim Bennett before. He was an associate of Sid Coleman at Ardmore and Beechwood, EMI's publishing division, and had played a key role both in procuring our boys' publishing rights as well as getting them signed to Parlophone EMI in the first place. Bennett had been doing a great deal of work, at least in his own opinion, getting the Beatles onto radio and television to support Love Me Do. He had, in fact, secured the Beatles a play on Saturday Club, a radio show that had 10 million listeners nationwide.
So why was that show such a big deal? It was for like little hipster kids, kind of?
Well, it had a whole bunch of different segments. It was a 2-hour show, but I think the part that they kind of were getting was that they did a request, kind of time where they would play requests that they had gotten over the week. And so that was a big thing for new people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So a big deal. Okay.
Yeah. But that went south.
What?
When the host of the program, Brian Matthew, discovered that
spoilers,
a substantial number of request cards for the Beatles that had been received by the BBC had been postmarked in Liverpool. He thought that someone was cheating. Saturday Club producer Jimmy Grant called Bennett into his office to tell him that the Beatles were being pulled from the show. Bennett was furious at Brian Epstein for encouraging fans in Liverpool to send the request cards. And he actually had it out with him. He scolded Brian, telling him that he should stay out of marketing and stick to managing.
And Brian loves to be scolded, doesn't he?
Oh, yes, very much. Well, and years later, Bennett said regarding Brian's efforts, this is a quote from Bennett, "I couldn't believe anyone had been so stupid." So, as for George Martin, he would say that Ardmore and Beechwood did virtually nothing to get the record played. Bennett would certainly take issue with that, but something else may have been going on in Martin's mind. It's been suggested that Martin wanted to kind of distance himself from the story that the Beatles had been forced on him, and his own indiscretions that had resulted in that, and that he hadn't wanted to sign the Beatles in the first place. Ardmore and Beechwood had a lot to do with that, so separating from them would give him kind of a clean slate.
This all makes sense because you can hear it in all his he never does own up to how it really happened.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And he's always given this news story like, "Oh yes, I knew they were great."
Yeah. Well,
it was their charm at first, but it was a great decision of mine,
But then there's more though, right? Because here's the thing, right? Besides, he had a friend who was getting into publishing. A chap by the name of
Dick James.
Meanwhile, Brian was not a fan of being spoken to the way Kim Bennett had done. In his anger, he had actually already begun searching for possible new publishers for the Beatles. One he had in mind was Hill and Rage, who did the publishing for Elvis himself. Finally, Martin was able to convince Brian to come over to his way of thinking. He would say, this is a quote from George Martin, Sir George, "In the end, I recommended Dick because he was hungrier than the others, and his was a British company." Well, we've jumped ahead a bit for this, and I won't go any further until the time comes, but suffice to say that there would soon be a company you may have heard of called Northern Songs. It is, after all, only a Northern song.
Yeah, man, I didn't know any of that, except I knew that their publisher was Northern Songs, not Ardmore and Beechwood. After.
Right, except for Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. That was the only one that was on Ardmore and Beechwood in the end.
I think it's nice to see our heroes as just, humans.
Yeah.
People who, like, just want to get embarrassing shit out of the way and, save face and all that. The coming winter would bring this historic weather. We're not joking. This is historic. It's like once in 100 years or more, once in 140 years, maybe, something like that. The big freeze. It was all over Northern Europe. It's more important to our story than you might think if you weren't in Northern Europe at the time. Let's let Rob Geurtsen describe just how consequential it was to our story.
It's 1963, and Please Me is going to be released.
This is the period of the Great Freeze. That's a very big deal, isn't it?
In Britain, they said it was the coldest month of January since 1814. So
Wow.
that was like almost 150 years ago. It was a period in across the British Isles and across northwest or Western Europe. It started in December, mid-December, with a lot of snowfall, 20 feet high waves in the areas. The infrastructure broke down in Holland, in Norway, in Germany, and in England as well. So it was cold, and the only things that people had was the television and the radio to be informed and have entertainment.
Well, now I feel cold. One thing I want to put out there is how during this very cold time, the number of radio and television appearances by the Beatles was beginning to add up. I've put together a list of these shows, including some harder to find information about the names of the shows, the radio and television shows, which networks they were on, whether they were local or national, etc. I'll be putting a separate page up on the Barmy Beatle blog website with all this information. And of course, over the years, that's going to become a longer and longer list.
But I always am confused by, is this radio, TV? Okay, it was radio.
Right.
But was it just that region? Or if it's ITV, was it just Grenada shown in the Northwest? Or was it shown everywhere on the weekends?
Yeah, exactly. Well, so right now, I wanted to point out the acceleration of these appearances. Love Me Do, as we know, was released on October 5th, 1962. During the months of October, November, and December, that's 3 months, the Beatles appeared on 4 radio shows and 5 television programs.
Whoa.
This is beyond, by the way, just being played on the radio. These are actual shows that they would appear on, right? Okay. Out of these 9 appearances over those 3 months, 4 of them were nationwide, including 2 radio appearances on Radio Luxembourg. The other 5 were regional, mostly in the north, out of Manchester. Of great interest is the fact, this is hilarious to me, that on December 4th, 1962, they made a national TV appearance on Tuesday Rendezvous, which, if you were there, you would remember was a children's TV show.
Wow.
So they did a couple of those over the months. In comparison, in the month of January 1963 alone, they made 8 appearances on radio and television, 5 of which were nationwide. Remember that it was towards the end of December that Love Me Do reached the BBC Top 20 on the UK singles chart, topping out at number 17.
Wait a minute. So you're saying in the next 3 months, so sort of to the end of 62, suddenly it feels really, really busy with radio and TV, but that's nothing compared to the first month of 63, right?
Yeah, there were basically one less, but still basically the same number of radio and TV appearances in 1 month, January 63, as there had been in the 3 months, October, November, December of 62.
All during the big freeze.
All during the big freeze. Right. Well, it made sense that more appearances would be happening because of Love Me Do being in the charts. But the most important one was the television appearance on January 19th, had been taped on January 13th, on Thank Your Lucky Stars, one of the two most important TV shows they could have hoped to be on, the other being Jukebox Jury, right? Mm-mm. This was big news. And Rob Geurtsen talked a bit about that and the circumstances around it that we can listen to right now.
Nobody could predict. Yeah, of course, George Martin predicted it. You'll have your first number one here with Please Please Me. But, you can't get it up the chart. It's not an automatic process when you're new, and they were still new. But getting the single in the charts, just seeing it in the charts makes people on the radio responsible for radio programs and television to acknowledge that. And then, we got to get them on the TV. And then when Brian calls them, or whoever from NEMS Enterprise calls the directors or the producers of a show, you're invited. And that is the lucky strike they make.
People were frozen in, right?
Yeah. They're frozen in. They're sitting at home. Their only form of entertainment was the radio or the BBC on television, and they were watching it. And just imagine, they were already getting up the charts with Please Please Me a little bit, but they were at the bottom end of the bill. There were like 6 bands, and they were at the bottom end of the bill. But they made a huge impression. This was like it was recorded on January 13, and it was transmitted a couple of days later. And this was the program on Saturday night that everybody was watching in that area.
Well, that is interesting. So we're seeing this phenomenon where some appearances get the single to go higher a little bit. The single goes higher a bit. That creates more appearances, and it's like a dance back and forth almost.
Yeah.
Each supports the other. We usually stick to exactly 60 years ago. Obviously, this episode we haven't. We've been jumping around.
We said we weren't going to, but we did.
We lied. Sometimes it's useful to step back and look about a year into the past or a year into the future, just to kind of situate where we are in the story. Now, obviously, in October, November 62, the Beatles don't know what 63 is going to bring. Mal Evans doesn't know. Brian Epstein doesn't know. Nobody in the world knows what's going to happen in 63. But of course we know because it's 60 years later and we can look back. We have encyclopedias and the internet. And memories. So in the same way, Andy's clarified the upcoming TV and radio appearances. We need in our minds to keep the stages of UK Beatlemania straight. Last episode, we explained that the between the singles between Love Me Do and Please Please Me period was proto-mania, before the mania. I'll just quickly break the next year plus into 4 periods, including that between the singles one, which we're in now, the current period plus the next 3. And that'll help us make sense of their rise to fame in Britain before going to Sweden, Paris, and the USA. Their UK rise in 4 parts. So here we go. 1. Between the singles, it's From Now. Soon Love Me Do is rising to number 17. Then into 3 months of the big freeze with Thank Your Lucky Stars as a kind of a high point. Then a period in March when record buyers react and Please Please Me tops the charts for some weeks. That's a big deal. Then they know they're going somewhere. I think that must have been such a high a big confidence builder for all of them.
Right.
That hasn't happened yet. Not yet mania, but just before UK Beatlemania explodes. Okay, so now stage 2, UK Beatlemania begins. At least conquering the youth nationally in the UK. Spring and summer 63, the period when From Me to You tops the charts. And still, the first American releases flop.
Can't wait to talk about those.
And they get laughed at on American Bandstand. Stage 3 is the mainstreaming of UK Beatlemania. You see the difference? So they were kind of the cool new thing for the kids. Parents thought they were wacky in stage 2. But then in stage 3, the fall of 63, they become the press's darlings. The press warms up to them, takes them more seriously, but still finds them cute. The establishment embraces them. They're more like household names in Britain. They do the Palladium, then Sweden gigs, and then the Royal Variety Show. And then in America, what? Bwamp, bwamp, bwamp. Capitol in America is still disinterested, and this is creating tension, of course, tension and impatience at EMI, which owns Capitol.
Yes.
Last I'll mention is stage 4, farther into the future, more than a year from now in our timeline, winter 63-64. Not a big freeze. Or not as big a freeze, I suppose.
Right.
EMI forces Capitol to press and promote the Beatles. That's a big change. And then suddenly, in the States, lots of promo dollars are spent. DJs push I Wanna Hold Your Hand. Epstein and Sullivan make a beautiful and mutually beneficial compromise.
Mm-hmm.
The Beatles play in Paris for a couple of weeks and then are soon flying across the Atlantic.
Right. And we all know why they flew across the Atlantic at that time, don't we?
Oh, it was a big thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. Something very big was going to happen on February 9th, 1964.
What, pray tell?
The truth can now be told. They flew over so that they could be present at the birth of your humble co-host. That's me, Mr. Andrew Martin Adamson. It was quite a celebration where they gave me a kind of strange gift. It was a really big shoe. That's where that phrase comes from, you know. But wait, are you thinking something else was happening? What could that have been?
Well, I just want people to know, listeners, that that wasn't all bullshit. It was actually, he apparently was really born that day, the day of the first Ed Sullivan appearance.
It is actually true, yes.
I'm about as young as any human could be and actually remember it. I was like 3 1/3 at the time.
All I know is that I was told that all the nurses wanted to watch it.
Well, we'll be right back. So we're getting very near the end of today's episode here. I wanted to note the feel of the upcoming 60 years ago winter. The winter of Thank You Lucky Stars. The winter that came before Beatlemania in the UK. I mean, after 2 quick trips to Hamburg, the upcoming winter in the UK, we're going to sense a change in the Beatles' life world that we can, to some extent, understand. The incredible Arctic conditions, long drives over and over.
Yeah.
More and more interaction with radio and TV people. and just watching their single, Please Please Me, rise on the NME and the Melody Maker charts, a little up, a little down each week as things happen. Each appearance kind of affecting the rise, each rise affecting appearances that are coming up. And finally, it reaches the top. Good to keep this fresh context of the upcoming winter in mind in our daily posts in social media, our pages and groups, and your blog and etc. And in our upcoming episodes of this podcast.
Yeah. And hey, before we go, remember that whole thing about the puzzle piece that isn't so amazing?
Oh, yeah. Dick James. Yeah.
Yeah, the change in publishing, right?
Right.
Well, what if I told you this? As we've heard from Rob, the Beatles getting on Thank Your Lucky Stars was a huge boost to their career. And if you remember, Love Me Do publisher Ardmore and Beechwood's rep, Kim Bennett, had not been able to procure that important step. So how exactly did they get on that show in January? Well, yes, Love Me Do had gained ground on the charts, but someone would still have to step up and finish that connection. That person was Dick James.
Whoa.
Just a piece of sky? Something to think about.
That is quite a thing, All of these pieces, necessary pieces,
Yeah.
We're not saying it was predestination or destined to happen, but the pieces had to be in place. Thanks to Rob Geurtsen, the Beatles Bible, Denise A. Lapola, and hey, if you've ever wondered what mic Andy and I use, it's iPad Pro with its built-in microphones recorded through the Dolby On app. In case you were wondering.
It works.
We think it's the best mic in the world, actually.
It's very nice.
The iPad Pro is a microphone. And more. The podcast is hosted by Anchor, a Spotify subsidiary. Hey, see you next time, Andy. Happy Halloween.
My favorite day of the year. Happy Halloween to you and to everyone. Take care, Larry. And thanks to everyone listening. Until next time.
Blueberry.
Count Chocula.
Some people who